Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. This will be the post conference title game recap, kind of before the bowls. We're not going to be previewing any bowl games yet, but the itinerary is going to be essentially discussing Ohio State's coaching change, which happened today, the day of this recording. Ryan Day taking over for Urban Meyer. Next will be the conference title game recap. We'll recap all five of those games. Some of those games will not take very long to recap, but we'll talk about those, get into our winners and losers from that week as always, and then discuss some Heisman talk about the playoff selection if they got that right, our thoughts on how they go about selecting the team. So let's get into Ryan Day as the new coach. Addison, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on Urban Meyer stepping down, and I guess your thoughts overall on Ryan Day and what you expect from the program moving forward.
Well, with the way things have gone since this summer, everything that's gone on, we kind of we knew this was going to come soon, eventually, just not quite this soon. I personally thought Urban probably had another year at least before he was done here, but yeah, so it's definitely surprising for it to happen now, though. Um, with Day, I like what he's done as offensive coordinator. Obviously, they've been preparing for this, for a little bit now.
Right.
And you wonder if, since the summer, if they kind of thought or wanted it to end up like this, but we just didn't know about it or what.
Sure.
If they worked out something behind the scenes or something. But yeah, I mean, it was a record-setting Ohio State offense this year. A lot of that has to do with Haskins, though, so I don't really know how much I can attribute it today. I do think Day's a good coach. I like what I've seen from him so far. But the important things, going forward, we gotta keep our recruits that we've got now, and we'll see what coaches we can keep. There are a few on the staff that I definitely like to keep. Some I don't really care about, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the Lincoln Riley transition.
Yeah.
With Oklahoma, except even a little smoother than that, since Stoops just retired in the summer before the season.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Tolman, what are your thoughts on this situation? Do you think, in all likelihood, do you think the program continues to be like a top five program? Do you see any kind of fall off at all? Any concerns with Day?
Well, I think it continues to be a top five program. So the most surprising thing to me was that just the timing that if it was going to happen this year, that they announced it before the Rose Bowl as opposed to after the game. But I'm sure they did that, probably to save face for recruiting. But interestingly, this isn't right now on paper. This isn't the greatest recruiting class that we've had compared to the last several years. So maybe they thought maybe they didn't care as much about losing recruits. But the reason why I like having Day and like Ohio State still being a top five program is just the trend for offenses. The way that we're recruiting quarterbacks now is moving away from the dual threat running quarterbacks,
right,
into more of the pro style passers like the Dwayne Haskins, the guy Dwan Mathis, and then Jack Miller that's coming down the road. So I think that's interesting. I think the real reason why this happened now is because I think Ohio State, the administration, really likes Ryan Day as a coach, and I think if they didn't promote him now, that they were afraid that he was going to get taken. So that's why I think whatever is being said, I think that's actually why it happened now.
Yeah, Day last year, he had confirmed at least one head coaching offer from an SEC school. I believe Mississippi State might have been one of those. It was never. I can't remember if they were actually confirmed, as far as which programs, but they had to pay him a lot of money to stick around, and maybe they all knew this was kind of going to happen, like you guys were alluding to. So it's kind of interesting as far as how like the team will look schematically. Defense, I think we're not completely sure yet because we don't really know who's going to be around. Offensively, Day likes to stretch the field vertically a little bit more. Urban's more horizontal. So with Day being a Chip Kelly disciple, I still think he's going to focus on the ground game, but I can see us taking more shots down the field. And, like you were alluding to, Tolman, I think Day saw what he can do with like a pocket passer like Haskins. Maybe that's the kind of quarterback that they are actually trending towards, especially with, the recruits that they're bringing in. So I think in all likelihood, the program will be just fine. I think he's, by all accounts, a very, very good coach. It's just time will tell as far as how is he with situational football, how is he with clock management, a lot of that, head coaching stuff that a lot of people take for granted. So definitely a big shakeup in college football, though. Urban Meyer's, no matter your opinions on him off the field, on the field, he's been one of the best to ever do it. So big shoes to fill for Ryan Day. But yeah, let's move on to
Nick, one more thing.
Yeah, go for it.
As far as the recruiting class this year, so like Tolman kind of mentioned this a little bit. This is a good year in terms of recruiting, I think, to have a coaching transition because we only have 10 seniors on scholarship this year.
Right.
So we don't have a lot of room to bring in guys anyway, so it's not like he has to go out and like hit a huge home run in recruiting. If we get like a few like big time recruits like what's his name, the receiver?
Garrett Wilson,
yeah. He's already said he's 1,000% committed. So, and I know there have been a few guys who have said they're still committed. So,
right.
Yeah, we should be all right there. I think it'll be fine in terms of recruiting.
Yeah, I mean,
so we can keep things like stable this year, and then hopefully have a good year next year and keep things going.
Yeah. No, I think it'll work out. It'll like we said, time will tell with Day as far as being like the full time head coach. So.
I got. Sorry, one more point on this.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you think that every coaching job has a limit on it? Like Urban Meyer's, only been able to last 7 years max out of place. Do you think? And I feel like that's the same way for a lot of these high profile coaches, outside of like maybe Saban and a couple others. But do you think the job at a school like Ohio State is just so stressful that the tenures are doing with like social media and the way that the media treats coaches? Do you think that this is about as long as a coach can go in this day and age?
Yeah, I do, just because everything you alluded to, like the stress of the job, the modernization of like you said, the 24/7 news cycle, social media. I think also that it's funny that you brought up Saban because I think it's really tough for a lot of coaches at big time programs right now because it's almost like a lot of these schools are saying like they're kind of comparing their coaches to like that kind of track record or like resume. Like it's really tough on like, especially let's say coaches in the SEC West. It's like, hey, we want to win. We want to win SEC West titles, compete for the SEC, but it's so hard to live up to arguably the greatest coaching job of all time. So I think expectations, the stress of the job, the modernization of 24/7 news with social media, and I would say there definitely is like a capped almost like term for these coaches. Addison, do you feel differently, or do you agree that their shelf life is?
No, I agree. I agree at Ohio State. I mean, it doesn't take very many losses before they're going to be calling for your head.
Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts from you guys, or do you want to move on to the conference title game recap? No thoughts? Okay. Okay. So first game we'll get into is ACC title game, Clemson and Pitt. This was a bloodbath. I mean, quick recap. I don't think we have to really talk too much about this game, but this game pretty much went how we thought it would go. Pitt was not able to run the ball efficiently like they're used to. They were made very one-dimensional. Spoiler alert, Kenny Pickett might show up on this week's loser nomination, or he is a nominee, but
Maybe.
Maybe, just maybe.
Maybe.
But yeah, Clemson was able to run the ball for, I think it was 35 attempts for like close to 300 yards or over 300 yards. Trevor Lawrence actually did struggle a little bit. I think Clemson fans are hoping that he gets that out of his system before their next game against Notre Dame. But yeah, this game was pretty much a bloodbath, just a huge mismatch. Any thoughts from you, Tolman, on that game that are worth mentioning?
Pitt is one-dimensional, and I really like Travis Etienne. So I think he's a true sophomore. So maybe look at him as an early season Heisman favorite next year. That's about it.
Yeah, he's very explosive. Addison, any additional thoughts on that game, or do you just want to move on?
No comment.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, not surprising. All right, yeah, let's just get into the Big Ten championship. Ohio State beat Northwestern pretty handedly. Northwestern came out after halftime with some good coaching adjustments, some fire, made that game pretty interesting. But Northwestern, as we said when we previewed this game, that they are not able to get pressure on the quarterback. They give up a lot of completions in the passing game, and that's what ended up happening. Dwayne Haskins, possible winner nominee this week. But, I think this game went pretty much how we thought. What were your guys' thoughts? I'll start with you, Addison, on the Big Ten championship game.
Well, yeah, so we thought Ohio State's receivers, Northwestern is going to have trouble keeping up with us athletically, there. And that, for the most part, that's what happened. I mean, Haskins had a ridiculous game again, threw for almost 500 yards. Ohio State was cruising at halftime, then came out kind of flat in the third quarter. Northwestern got back in. It was like 24-21 going into the fourth quarter. But then Ohio State ended up just pulling away. Turning point was pretty much when Chase Young got his hand on Thorson's arm, forced an interception, and then from that point on, it was pretty much all Ohio State.
Yeah, that was a big play. A lot of a big momentum swing there for sure. Tolman, any additional thoughts on that game?
Yeah, so one, I knew that we were out of the playoff when we gave up that 77-yard touchdown run.
I thought that too.
I felt like we had to show the committee that we had finally solved the problem of giving up big plays, but we weren't able to do that. So I think that was when that was over. I was like, that's it. Let's just try to win the game and go to the right bowl.
I thought we were out already anyway.
Yeah, but I know.
I had like a little bit of hope. I was like, maybe after that first drive, maybe we do like a 59-0 stomping and maybe we have a chance. Maybe we have a long shot. But after that run, I was like, all right, it's over.
Tolman, I kind of thought the same thing. Like I didn't think there was much hope at all, but if there was when that play happened, I just thought to myself, like, that's it. We have solved nothing. So especially against an offense that is like literally has zero explosive playmakers.
And then, so the last thing I want to say about it is I'm glad that Dwayne Haskins got invited to New York. He really had kind of an incredible year.
He did
as a pure passer. And what we saw for the first time on Saturday night that we haven't seen, really since early in the season was he's pretty mobile within the pocket and can make some nice throws. After the pocket breaks down a little bit, he steps up and make some nice throws that way. So I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, he definitely. It looks like he's become more comfortable within the pocket, facing pressure. I think he is going to need a little bit of work with his footwork going into the NFL whenever he decides to make that jump. He is, in fact, playing in the Rose Bowl, so that maybe there's hope that he stays around for us OSU fans. But yeah, he had a sensational year. He deserves his seat in New York, and we'll get into that Heisman talk coming up a little bit later here. But yeah, I mean, OSU controlled the game. I thought they have definitely looked better the last two games here, but obviously it just wasn't quite enough to get them into the playoffs. So let's move into The next game, the Pac-12 game, this game was so like unwatchable. Yeah. I mean, the only thing I'll say about it was Addison and I drank a lot of beers at Wink and Lizard and just kind of made fun of the teams the whole time. But, Tolman, I think you'll find this funny. We said that Jake Browning reminds us of Tommen from Game of Thrones, just like really passive and like just weak overall. But
That's hilarious. He also reminds me of just like a worse version of Ken Dorsey.
it's funny you said that. I've said before he like reminds me of Ken Dorsey. Like he just had really good players around him, but he just has like a really, really weak arm. He just is frail. But that game was, I think, probably an embarrassment for the Pac-12. I mean,
okay, so
it summed up the Pac-12 season, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a question though. Like, I don't think we need to talk about the game. What is wrong with the Pac-12? No one shows up to the games. There's no good teams right now. Like, what? The coaches aren't for. I mean, they have okay coaches. Like, what's wrong?
I think part of it is, I don't know, Addison, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you might agree with this, but I think football just means more in other parts of the country. Like, I just don't think on the West Coast they care that much about football. Like, I think SC fans, they care about SC, but if they aren't good, I don't think it matters as much as it does, like, in Columbus or, like, Tuscaloosa. But there's also...
When USC is good, it's like, I don't know, I feel like they only care, like, when they're good, you know?
That's possible because
if they're good, it's like, oh, it's a bonus. We have someone to watch.
Yeah. And I also think that maybe like I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I feel like the schools in the Northwest just don't. I just don't think they care as much, and I don't think there's as much of a population to draw from. I think sometimes I feel like their teams lack depth. Their officiating is the worst in the country. Every single year, I think to myself watching Pac-12 games, like how can these guys possibly be getting paid to referee these games? They're awful. But that game was definitely unwatchable. I think if OSU wants to be in the Rose Bowl, they're going to stomp Washington. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to say about the actual game. There was no offensive touchdowns. I mean, why are we even? I don't even know why this game was actually brought up. So, do you guys?
And the one touchdown was basically it was just a result of pathetic offense.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just a drop by the receiver that got kicked up into the air and then pick sixth.
Right. So, all right. Yeah, let's move on.
Actually, okay, so one more point. I actually disagree with you. I think they do have talent out there. I mean, they have a ton of those prep schools that they collect players from all around the country. So
yeah,
there's talent out there. So I just think they're not staying there.
Yeah, that's possible, and I think maybe there definitely is enough kids in California. They all can't go to just like SC or wherever. So like Arizona State, Oregon, Washington, like a lot of those schools do get a lot of California kids, but I don't know. The conference they're in like serious need of like a marquee out of conference win. Because I think they are not going to get the benefit of the doubt if it's ever close, like for the playoff. I mean, do you guys remember when it was just a few weeks ago that we were talking about Washington State as a one-loss team? We liked how they looked, and most like playoff predictors gave them like a 2% chance to make it. Like it's just like nobody respects that conference right now. So I don't know. I think part of the problem too is like their premier program, USC, has a really, really terrible head coach, in my opinion. And until that changes, if they add Cliff Kingsbury, then Kingsbury could help them, like, offensively, maybe.
I think that's confirmed now.
Yeah. Do we think that, like, maybe he is being hired with, maybe, like, Lynn Swann thinks he's actually going to take over that job? Is that possible?
I think that's the trend in college football now is hire the sexy offensive coordinator as your head coach.
Yeah, get a guy who like can work with quarterbacks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So that'll be interesting to see moving forward. But let's move into a couple games that actually were competitive and worth watching. Big 12 championship. This was on noon on Saturday. Oklahoma ended up pulling the game out against Texas. Tolman, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the game and Oklahoma avenging your loss, and maybe like some general thoughts on Oklahoma before they play Alabama.
Well, Oklahoma's defense showed up just a little bit more than they had in the last several weeks.
Yeah.
I thought that Kyler Murray, once again, he played great.
Yeah.
And very, 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 very highly deserving of being invited to New York, and possibly now I think the front runner in the Heisman race. But I think we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great game to watch. Texas had some opportunities, but overall, look, Oklahoma's a better team, and if their defense can get stops, they can outscore anybody, and that's what happens.
Yeah. I guess I'll go real quick, and then Addison will finish with you. So yeah, Texas, as Tolman alluded to, Oklahoma held Texas to, I believe, only like 2.8 yards per carry on the ground. They definitely, that might have been one of their better defensive games of the year, I think. I know that they felt like they had to show the committee a little bit of something. Kyler Murray, he's been so good, and the playmakers around him, CeeDee Lamb, Hollywood Brown, hopefully he's healthy for that game with Bama. They just have so many good players around them. But they definitely did a little bit more on defense than what they had all year. I mean, Texas was competitive, but I think eye test, we alluded to this like when we talked about this game the first time around. Like, Texas won the game. We gave them credit. I felt like Oklahoma looked like the better team. They just didn't win the football game. And I wanted to see them prove that in the championship game, with a lot to play for. But, Lincoln Riley, he, by all accounts, I think everybody agrees, he's a fantastic offensive mind and play caller. And they're a dangerous football team. Like, I don't think anybody really wants to play them. But it'll be interesting. And obviously we'll preview all those major bowl games later on in the month here. But Addison, your thoughts on that game? Any general thoughts on Oklahoma before they play Bama?
Well, Oklahoma's the performance they had defensively was the reason I thought going into our game that we were already out.
Yeah.
Barring a miracle win by Pitt, which I didn't think was going to happen at all. Yeah, I thought all Oklahoma, if they just won and showed like a pulse on defense, I thought that's all they had to do to basically lock up a spot.
Yeah.
It was a good game throughout. Oklahoma, scored that touchdown late, kind of make it a little wider margin than it was for most of the game, I'd say, which is unfortunate since I had Texas +8, and then I was really, really pissed off when they returned that kickoff and then it got called back. That's another thing about this game. Texas had opportunities. They killed themselves with penalties. Yeah,
they definitely did. And it was tough for me to watch personally just because, like, in my heart, I wanted Texas to win the game. But if they weren't going to win, then I wanted Oklahoma to cover. So, because that was my biggest bet of the week. So it was kind of like one of those, like, I just didn't like myself for betting Oklahoma, but it is what it is. And they showed up, and like we said, their defense actually didn't look too bad for once. It's going to be potentially a little bit different of an animal if Tua is healthy when they play Bama, but that's a good segue into the SEC championship game where it looked like for a lot of the game again. I mean, the last two times Georgia and Bama faced off, Georgia has led for 119 of the 120 minutes, I believe, or something ridiculous like that. Georgia, or something like that, yeah, and. But Georgia brought it in this game. It looked like for a minute they could actually pull this off, but then I think kind of predictably it looked like Bama. They obviously started storming back, but Tua, he didn't look too good in the beginning. They were getting some pressure, which Georgia had not been getting pressure all year. Their defense was playing with basically their hair on fire. Fromm was really efficient. He was picking apart Bama's secondary. So Tolman, I'll start with you. your thoughts on the game, your I guess like general thoughts on Georgia. Do you think that they like eye test? Where do you rank them if you had like a power rating for yourself?
So if I had to power rank them, I would actually put them fourth. I do believe that they are. I actually might even put them third.
Okay.
I think that they are clearly a team that can challenge Alabama, and they've shown that they've been close. But I'll save some of my more comments on that for the playoff discussion.
Yeah,
later.
sure.
But look, they did pretty much everything they could do to win that game for 3+ quarters. And what I didn't get was why don't what are you doing putting out your backup quarterback as who we know can run as your punt protector. That's an obvious fake.
Right.
That's in their pants. Something's up there. Okay, Alabama's they figured it out.
Right.
And two, why don't you make Jalen Hurts drive the field?
Right.
Why don't you make Alabama's backup quarterback that is, granted he performed outstanding in the backup role.
Right.
But why don't you make him drive 90 yards to take the lead there?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the same exact thing. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know. Addison and I have talked for years how Georgia likes to shit their pants. It was usually, in my opinion, like very Mark Richt based, but Kirby did it this time too. That call I felt was like a desperation move for some reason. Tolman, I thought the same exact thing. I thought, why not make Hurts drive the football? Why would you feel like you had to pull that off? And it was, as you said, it was so obvious what was going on. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. I think it was just a desperation play. But Addison, your thoughts on that game?
Well, Georgia's defense showed that Tua is, a human.
Yeah.
He's like any other quarterback when he's getting hit a bunch. So,
right.
It was so similar to last year. It was crazy. And right down to Bama, using two quarterbacks going the opposite way this time.
Yeah.
Same stadium too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Georgia looked like, for the first half or 2.5 quarters, Georgia looked like a much better team to me. So I was very surprised by that, the way they came out. I thought the game kind of turned when Georgia had that one drive in the third quarter. I think they were in the red zone. They ended up settling for a field goal, and then they missed the field goal. They had a chance to go up 3 scores there. I thought that, even if they just get a field goal there and go up 17, that would have been huge for them.
Yeah.
I think a touchdown, if they got a touchdown there, they probably would have gone on to win the game.
Yeah.
But they came in with no points, and then Bama scored a touchdown. Now, all of a sudden, it's a 7-point game. I think Georgia started thinking about last year again.
Yeah, that's very possible. Go ahead.
Georgia started doing weird shit. Like, I don't even know why they put Justin Fields in at quarterback to start that one drive. And then that's the drive that ended with the fake punt. I totally agree with Tolman. Why don't you just trust your team as well as you played? That coaching move is you think that if you don't get this, you're going to lose the game.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I have the same thoughts as you guys on that specific play, but
so there was only one plausible answer that I can think of, and that is that they felt that in the event that they did punt the ball and Alabama didn't have great field position, Alabama could drive the field and basically score and run out the clock. Whereas if they gave them good field position, maybe Alabama scores, but they do it a little bit quicker like they did, and they would have a chance to get the ball back. But I still think that's a terrible decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I agree. At the end of the
Yeah.
day,
I didn't like it. I mean, usually I like aggression, but I thought that was
like
just not
reckless.
necessary.
Yeah, for sure. Addison, how how good is Georgia? Are they like where are they at if you had like a power rating?
I would put them. I agree with Tolman. I would put them at 3.
Okay, so behind Bama and Clemson.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was just curious. I have them. I actually have them 2. But I think you can argue them. I haven't seen anybody yet that lists them like outside the top 4. I was just curious if you guys had like a different opinion. So yeah, I mean they showed that they're very very talented team. I just think that unfortunately
Also
for
played ridiculous too.
yeah, and I think unfortunately for them they just play in the same conference as Bama. That is interesting going into next year for them too. Is that Fromm will be there? So what the hell are they going to do with Fields? I mean, I don't know. Is he willing just to sit around again?
Well, a lot of teams are kind of having to figure out what to do with multiple quarterbacks. You know.
Yeah.
We've seen that in a few places. Ohio State,
Right.
Bama, Clemson.
Right.
It's like a lot of the good teams just have like a stockpile of good QBs. So I mean, it's it's a good problem to have, but then they also want to get playing time. So you always see them transferring elsewhere.
Yeah. Side note: Kelly Bryant today made his decision to transfer to Missouri.
I didn't see he made a final decision.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he's horrible, but I don't really think that's like a home run for Missouri or anything. I don't even know if it's a guarantee that he'll start, to be honest. Do you guys have any thoughts on that real quick, or should we just move on to winners and losers?
No.
Okay, good. Thank you. I was hoping not. So, Addison, why don't you kick it off with some winners and losers for this last week?
All right. Well, losers. Georgia for sure.
Yeah.
Just because you had 2 touchdown lead, 2 games in a row against Bama, and you blew it both times. They just seem like they're the program that can't get over the hump right now. It's like kind of the way we used to think of Clemson before Clemson finally broke through. Like Georgia just cannot break through,
Right.
even with all the talent that they have. It has been this way for decades now.
Yeah.
So Georgia's one of my losers. Pac-12 title game in general, the whole Pac-12, the entire season, the championship game, the fans. I mean, there was like no one there. It was really embarrassing all around.
Oh, hey, yeah. Funny comment, real quick. I saw this on Twitter that there were more people at the Texas, like their equivalent of Division I or like whatever it is, like 6A or whatever. There were more people at that game than at the Pac-12 title game.
Dude, more people go to the Stanford UCLA soccer game. That's like a big deal.
Yeah, it's pretty pathetic. But yeah, Addison, continue with yours.
When I looked up the attendance for the Pac-12 game, it said 35,000. I think that's a lie.
Yeah, that's too many.
I don't think there were that many people.
There were
that many bought tickets.
Yeah.
Like they didn't even sell half the tickets.
Addison, I was thinking more like when they showed the stadium, I thought there was like maybe like 25. Honestly, like it might have been less than that.
Yeah, it was so empty.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
like spread out all over.
I do have a side note on that because I spend a lot of time in that area, like in that Silicon Valley area.
Yeah.
There's that stadium, and then there's literally nothing else to do there.
Yeah.
They have the stadium, and then they have all these industrial tech company buildings around it, and no good restaurants and no good bars. There's nothing to do around there.
Well, I wouldn't go to the game either then.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. But yeah.
I would not continue to have. I would not continue to have it in that venue.
No, it doesn't make any sense. I mean.
And that's where the championship game is this year.
Yeah, that's not good.
That'll be interesting.
Wow.
Like the SEC fans will be like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah, they will invade Silicon Valley, and it will be interesting. And even
if you want to hang out with a bunch of tech nerds, cool. But
right.
if you want to hang out with guys like me, then great.
You're right. Yeah. Addison, any more losers before you get into your winners?
Um, I'd say Tua also, just because I think his Heisman chances took a big hit.
They did.
Yeah.
They definitely did. We'll
So,
get into that.
so
Yeah.
I'll transition that into my winners.
Yeah, Addison, actually, on that, I don't think you can win the Heisman if you don't play well. If you exit your championship game, don't play, and you weren't playing well to start off with,
Yeah.
and the backup ends up winning it for you and
Yeah.
performing better. I don't think you can. As good of a season as he had, I think when he went out, when he went out, and on top of that, he was not playing well. I think that killed it.
Yeah, and people put a lot of stock in what you do in like your biggest games, pretty much. So,
Yeah.
And we don't have any other data points for him in bigger games because everything else was a blowout.
Right.
He only had like 20 snaps overall in the fourth quarter this year. I mean,
yeah,
he's the Heisman had never played in the fourth quarter, right?
Yeah, I mean that is crazy. Like he barely ever had to play the second half.
Yeah.
All year, including this game because he was hurt. So, yeah, I agree with you, Tolman. My winners probably will have some agreement here. Both Haskins and Murray, mostly because Murray, I think, may have positioned himself as the front runner. Haskins just for going off for almost 500 yards. He had 499, which at Ohio State is just like crazy. Like
it's absurd.
Before this year, we never saw numbers like that from quarterbacks. But I'll let you guys, give your picks.
Okay. I guess I'll go real quick. I have like some individuals, some programs. Addison, I guess I'll go with my winners first. Johnny Dixon, who his knees were so bad at one point, and for you people that are watching the pod, he's a receiver for Ohio State. His knees were so bad at one point that his career was thought to be over. He was very highly touted coming out of high school. He was having trouble staying healthy, staying on the field. He gave it one more shot at OSU 2 years ago. They, I believe, did some different things like with his like therapy or like rehab, like whatever he was doing for his knees. And he's been able to stay on the field the last 2 years. And he ended up having, I believe, like 6 receptions for like 130 yards and I believe a touchdown in the Big Ten championship game. But he's been a leader. He's been a guy for like a lot of the younger players on that team, not just the receivers, that somebody to look up to as far as like persevering and whatnot. So I give him a shout out. I thought he ended his career in a really good way, and he's got one more game to go. But yeah, obviously,
is there any chance that he gets an extra year somehow?
I haven't heard anything about that. I'd be more than happy to take him back, but
yeah, I don't know.
We'll have to look into that. But obvious ones: Dwayne Haskins, Kyler Murray. Another winner, Jalen Hurts, and Tolman kind of alluded to this. This kid, in an era that I feel like we're going to start seeing more transfers, maybe even mid-season, like Kelly Bryant. Jalen Hurts had lost 2 games in his career, won a national championship. We have given him some shit on this pod about not being the greatest passer, but in the biggest moment, I think personally for him, he came in the, out of the bullpen basically and possibly save Bama's season. I think we all agree they probably still make the playoff, but he comes in. I think he was like 7 of 9 for like 82 yards. He had a passing touchdown, a rushing touchdown. He came in and showed some grit and some good leadership. So I give him props for sticking around and being ready when his number was called.
It was like Drew Bledsoe saving the day.
Yeah, for sure. As far as winners, I think that was. I'm trying to remember if I had any more. I guess I'll give Fresno State a shout out. They went to Boise earlier in the year, lost as a favorite, came back, had to go to the blue turf again, but ended up this time pulling off the win in the biggest moment and took down the Mountain West Championship. So quick shout out to Fresno. Some losers. Kenny Pickett for Pittsburgh.
Yup.
Oh my God, he had Tolman sent me.
I have his line. I have his line right in front of me.
Yeah, go ahead and list it.
He's the loser of the week.
Yeah.
Okay? Are y'all ready for
Yeah,
this?
go for it.
5 of 16 for 8 yards and 1 interception. 8 yards.
8 yards.
Which is 8 yards.
How is that possible?
Point 5 yards per pass attempt.
His QBR was 3.3.
Oh my
How
God.
did he get QBR points?
I don't know. I don't know how he got a non-zero QBR out of that.
Yeah, then maybe we should question the QBR like system because
Yeah,
there's no
should
way.
have like a negative.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. So yeah, Tolman, thank you for the stat line. Kenny Pickett, he was bad. Some other losers. Yeah, Addison, I agree with Georgia. I felt like they had that game in their hands and let it slip away. Another. Yeah, and then another same losers, you Addison. The Pac-12 in general, that game being the biggest game, like as far as like on TV this year for them, probably trying to showcase their conference. And my God, that was not watchable football. So those are my winners and losers. Tolman, giving it to you now, bud.
Maybe it was smart of everyone to not go to the game.
Yeah, whoever went, they wasted every dollar that they spent. So Tolman, go ahead, bud.
Okay, so I think we covered the winners and losers pretty good. There is one more winner that I want to throw out there that has not been mentioned, and that's going to be UAB.
Okay.
From not having a football program at all, and in the span of and then they get it back and they win their conference.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, for sure.
UAB Conference USA champions. I know it's not a relevant conference, but to go from not having a program to winning your conference, it's fantastic.
No.
Actually, their coach is a strong coach of the year candidate, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's incredible what they did, no matter what conference they're in, and I love the Blazers because they won me quite a few units this year by backing them. So I'm definitely a fan of theirs. But yeah, that's a good one. Any others before we transition into like the Heisman talk? Why don't you start us off with that then? So we've got Kyler Murray, Tua, and then Dwayne Haskins. Those three are going to New York. Tua all year was the heavy betting favorite as far as Heisman frontrunner, and then all of a sudden this weekend there's a little bit of a switch. Kyler's now a slight favorite over both of them. Haskins is a pretty damn big underdog. I wouldn't expect his name to be called. I wouldn't be shocked if Tua's was called, honestly. But Tolman, why don't you start with like your thoughts on those three and I guess like a Heisman prediction, who you think should win it? Just kind of take it from there.
Okay, so if you just look at the stats, just like the pure numbers, Haskins has the best passing stats.
Right.
But actually, if you're smart about it, it doesn't quite stack up because both Kyler Murray and Tua didn't have as many attempts.
Yeah.
And if you put the number, extrapolate their numbers out to the attempts, they were actually a lot more efficient. They would have had more yards, more touchdowns than Haskins. Yeah. So for that reason, I crossed Haskins off the list.
Okay.
Then I already made the point about Tua. I don't think you can play like that in your biggest game of the year, then go out and win the Heisman. So then I crossed Tua off the list.
Okay.
And then we get to Kyler Murray. So Kyler Murray is my prediction for Heisman now. I think he's just had a fantastic year. He's very dynamic as a college quarterback, both passing efficiency, running the ball. Very, very explosive, very dangerous. I think the three candidates are very much deserving to be there, but it turns out that Kyler Murray kind of pulled ahead at the end. He played the best on the biggest stages. Even in their loss to Texas, he had a great game. So I give it to Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I actually thought that Kyler deserved it even before this past weekend where Tua kind of laid an egg and got hurt. But, they all three of them had amazing years. Tolman, as you alluded to, I think Buckeye fans will scream from the mountaintops that Haskins maybe had like better numbers, but yeah, when you look at it, Kyler and Tua were a little more efficient. They probably would have put up not only possibly the same numbers, but maybe even quite a bit more if they had the actual snaps and attempts. So I think they all three had great years. I predict that Kyler will actually take it down, and that's who I think should, in fact, win it. Addison, your thoughts?
So I would go Murray 1, 2 and 2, Haskins 3.
Yeah.
I think you can make a case for any of the three, and I think it's really close, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Vegas has Haskins at a distance like 60-1 to win it, which I think is kind of outrageous. I think that's just because Ohio State didn't make the playoff, and he's being punished for that, and he'll probably be, punished in terms of the voting for that.
Right.
But I mean, all three of them had like pretty comparable years to me. I think this is a really close year for the Heisman, just in general. If you look at like last year, it was like so obvious that Baker was going to win it. This year is a lot closer to me. But you're thinking about Murray. He's such a dynamic player. He can do it with his arm, with his legs. He might be like the fastest guy in college football. He had
false. Paris Campbell
no
is
bad games all year.
Like
seriously, did he have a bad game? Like he was great in every single game.
Right. Let me ask you guys this. I was thinking about this before because I felt like this topic might come up, but where I give Haskins a little bit of love is that, and Tua also, is that I think they both face better defenses. Kyler is, like I said, I think he should win it. He is amazing talent. I think he would have been very good in any conference that he played. But, Haskins and Tua did have to face better defenses, I think, in their conferences. Is that taken into account at all? Or is it just that Kyler just had more of those Heisman moments in big games? Or, does that matter at all?
I don't think the majority of voters think that way. I think that's a fantastic point.
Okay.
I think that's something that should be taken into more consideration.
Yeah.
But we see these Big 12 quarterbacks winning it all the time. So.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just something I thought about, especially after what Haskins did to, like Michigan, and then Northwestern's not thought of as like an amazing defense this year, but it wasn't like, playing Texas Tech, for example. So.
That's a pretty good defense too.
Yeah, right. So
Murray definitely played worse defenses. I still think he's very deserving now.
Oh, I agree. I wasn't trying to take anything away from him. I just thought that was something that should be brought up. But so yeah, we all seem to have the same top three and think that Kyler Murray should win it. I think
the one I mentioned this earlier, but the one player that if you were to invite a fourth person to the Heisman would be Travis Etienne from Clemson. I thought he had a great year. I think he's a really good player.
Yeah, he definitely did. And I think with the Heisman, it's switched to where like it's just not given to the absolute best player anymore. Now this year, I think these three could be argued as like the three best players potentially. But something else I thought of too is that as far as like an argument against Tua, is that if you took Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins off of those teams, how good would those teams actually be? Because I think Alabama could still win the SEC with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Etienne, yeah, he's really good. There were a lot of, obviously, like every year, there were a lot of players that, had huge years. And it's kind of tough for the guys that aren't quarterbacks or running backs. Like, this guy maybe didn't have I'd have to see his final year stats, but like Rondale Moore for Purdue, he single-handedly probably made them they had a couple other guys that are decent playmakers, but I'm just trying to think of guys that basically were able to put their teams on their backs like in multiple games. I felt like Rondale Moore was a guy that did that. I'm trying to think of other guys off the top of my head. I don't know if you guys have any more, but there were certainly a lot of guys that I felt like should have been given maybe a little bit more love, because it's always going to be, quarterbacks and then running backs. It's like the sexy positions, but there's certainly some other guys that play other positions that could be argued to be the best players in football. Any more thoughts from you guys for the Heisman talk, or do you want to get into this playoff selection and all that?
Go to the playoffs. Yeah, looking forward to this.
All right, so obviously, if you guys are watching this pod, then you care enough about college football to already know who's in the playoffs. So they selected those 4 teams. I think there wasn't a ton of argument against those 4, but where this discussion is going to go, I think, is how the committee selects. What is their criteria exactly? Has it changed from year to year? Because this year it seems like that maybe they nailed it possibly with the 4 most deserving teams, but their motto ever since this thing has taken over for the BCS has been the best 4. And this year there's a lot of people that don't think the best 4 teams are in. I think the majority of people feel that Georgia is a top 4 team. I would say the majority of people feel like Notre Dame is possibly not a top 4 team. There's a lot of people that think OSU should be in there with Oklahoma and Georgia, but it's interesting to discuss, and that's why we're going to get into it. So, Addison, I'll start with you. Do you, first of all, feel like the committee, selected the right 4 based on like kind of what they've told us about how they're selecting teams, and then do you think there should be a different 4? And how do you think this is going to work going forward as far as like, do you think the committee needs to redefine how they select teams?
Well, I never know what the fuck the committee is thinking. It seems like they just pick 4. They give out their rankings and then they just make up reasons to like justify what they're saying that particular week.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem very clear to me, and I find that very annoying. I have no problem with the 4 teams that they actually picked, but I do think it's weird that Georgia is ahead of Ohio State. So what I gotta say about that is I did say I think Georgia looks like the 3rd best team,
right?
But I rank it in terms of who gets into the playoff much more on like merit. Like I just have a different theory. I'm not looking for the 4 like quote unquote best teams. I'm trying to make it as I'm trying to remove subjectivity from it.
Yeah.
So I think that 1-loss conference champions should get priority over non-champions.
Yeah.
So I would rank Ohio State over Georgia.
Yeah, I agree with you. I felt like it was absolutely ridiculous that Georgia was rated ahead of Ohio State. And like you said, it's not that I do think Georgia's probably a better football team than Ohio State, but Georgia needs to be rated ahead of both Oklahoma and Ohio State if that's how you're going to do it. And if you feel like though that if you're the committee and you think that 1-loss champions, they should have some kind of priority, which I would agree with that, and I'll get into my thoughts in a second here. But then Georgia should be rated behind both those teams, in my opinion. It doesn't make any logical sense to have them in between one or the other. I don't understand it. So,
and the wins, like losses, have to matter. Like we can't just all right. So Georgia played Alabama. Yeah, that's the number 1 team.
Right.
They still lost, and it still has to matter. We can't just give them a mulligan.
Yeah, and
do we have to see Alabama versus Georgia again?
No, and
No, we don't, because we don't know. No.
Yeah, I think Corey from Denver brought up a good point recently, like in our thread, Addison, that it's so hard. Like, on one hand, you can sit there and say, like, well, I think Georgia's better than Notre Dame, for example, right? But the results on the field, like, during the season have to matter. And I like his point that there's a lot of imbalance as far as, like, schedules. Like, it's so hard to sit there and say, like, with confidence that you think one team is definitely better than the other. And so that's where I agree with you, Addison, that there needs to be, like, as much subjectivity taken out of it as we can. And I think I don't know if you guys agree with this, but, the BCS, we had the computers. People seem to think that was okay, and then they started to realize that there probably were better than just 2 teams more than 2 teams that potentially could be national title contenders. And I think maybe we've overcompensated a little bit as far as like bringing the human element into it. So for the first time in ever, essentially, like I've been a huge proponent of the 14 playoff, but it's gotten to the point where I just feel like putting it into like essentially 12 people's hands, who could have biases, who might, as far as like making human errors, like consider too much from like history when they're supposed to just think about just this year. Like with UCF, for example, everyone keeps talking about their like 25-game win streak or whatever, and kudos to them. That's great. But last season doesn't have anything to do with this year. And I know that the committee thinks about that. So for the first time, I actually am leaning towards making this thing 6 or 8 teams and giving priority to these conference champions representing all regions of the country. Yeah, maybe you get a couple teams in that probably maybe they aren't like legit national title contenders in most everyone's eyes, but at least they'll get to prove it on the field, and you won't have biases towards like just the southeastern part of the country. Like if because I could see in the next few years whether they deserve to get, not as much credit or not. But like, let's say we have a one-loss Pac-12 champion, they might have a hard time against like a two-loss SEC team or against one-loss Notre Dame or like some other team like that. So I I tend to lean more towards expansion now just for that reason, so we can take some subjectivity out of it, get all parts of regions of the country in because like I said, I think that there could be some bias as far as like how we view some of these conferences. So, Tolman, I'll give you the floor now. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so I have a fix. I have a fix for all of this.
Okay.
I'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
So we all agree that a human committee is indeed human and not very consistent, right?
Right.
So this year, probably the teams that got in are the most deserving. And if you look at the way they did it last year, they probably put in the best teams, which is why Alabama got in ahead of Ohio State.
Right.
So we could agree that criteria probably between this year and last year was different, correct? Or else if it were the same, I feel like if the criteria were the same as last year, and you put the best teams in, then Georgia would be in over Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think that's
or maybe Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean with they seem to like. There isn't a lot of consistency. I don't really know it.
So what we want is we want to get a combination of the best and the most deserving teams, right? If we could do that, we solve everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let's forget the committee, and this will never ever happen because of money and because of conference TV deals. But you have 16-team super conferences. You have your final 8 are the conference championship games, and then each of those conference winners plays in the college football playoff for the final 4. You don't add any games that way. You get a combination of teams that deserved it because they won their conference, and you get the best teams because they had to go through the conference. Okay? Now, you say that could eliminate some, non-Power 5 teams, or you have to pick, okay, what Power 5 team or what non-Power 5 teams get to join these 16-team super conferences, and this is where the money comes in. You do relegation. So, for example, this year when Illinois was horrible, they get relegated, and Buffalo, that was really good in the MAC, they get to come up and play in the Big Ten for the following year. So I think and it also gives an opportunity like at UCF, if they get put into that one of those 16-team super conferences, you get the chance to prove that you can play with the big boys, and if you make it the way through, then you get to be in a college football playoff. So I think if you do that, it removes a lot of the subjectivity, and you get the combination of the best and the most deserving teams. But it's never going to happen because of money.
Dr. Tolman, can we say Commissioner Tolman maybe? Can we?
Wildest theory ever. If I were the czar of college football, that is exactly what I would do. I think it would solve all of these problems. If you could figure out the way to make the money happen, it's the best way.
Yeah, Addison, remember when I think you and Corey and I have talked for a long time about it probably would be best if these programs broke away from the NCAA, if they were able to do that. And kind of create their own thing, kind of like what Tolman's talking about. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Tolman. I think in a perfect world, that's like a really good scenario, just based on money, like you said, and politics.
And what it also does is it makes like random like end of the year rivalries, like when like Northwestern is bad and Illinois is bad, it's all of a sudden like the most interesting game ever. Like which team is going to get relegated?
Yeah,
that's always been one of the great things about European soccer
yeah,
is that your relegation keeps basically all the games all season interesting.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Not all the games, but it keeps the bottom teams like still playing for like a lot. There's a ton on the line.
Yeah. Addison, what do you think about my thoughts on expansion now? Since you and I have been so like we drew a line in the sand for a long time now, 4 teams, and I've seemed to cross that line just because I think it's gonna be hard to get consistency and a lack of like such subjectivity. Are you leaning that way at all? Or are you still pretty hard on like just 4 teams?
So at first I was still like dead set on 4 teams. I think that this particular year would be better for 8 teams than like the first 4 years of it.
Right.
Why the Alabama's just gonna run through and win it? Like why do we need 8? Why do we need 8?
Yeah, that's another reason why I think the best team argument is stupid, because if we really want the best team to win it, we just wouldn't have a playoff and we'd give Alabama the trophy.
I feel like this is a year where if you had the BCS and you put Alabama versus Clemson, no one would have any arguments with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
right.
It was perfect for the BCS. But the reason I thought it'd be good for 8 was just because it was such a top-heavy year that you had 3 undefeated teams, which is rare, and then you had a couple of one-loss conference champions. So there was like really more, and then you had undefeated UCF if you want to throw them in there if you think they have a case or something.
Right.
Are you putting Washington in the top 8 this year? I mean, on the conference, so by this theory, you have to put the Pac-12 champion in there, right?
Yeah, that's
where
where
I would actually set up.
You would have to decide. I think. Go ahead, Addison.
I was going to say the way I would actually set up an 18 playoff is the Power 5 champions would all go, and the best Group of 5 champion would go, and then you'd have 2 at-larges.
Yeah, that's how I was thinking I would set it up too.
And because I don't want the playoff to have a bunch of like second and third place teams, because I think it's like if you're like the third best team in your conference, you've proven you're not one of the best teams. Yeah,
and a point I want to make about that Group of 5 qualifier real quick is they would have to be like a certain ranking, in my opinion, because it's not about being fair. I don't give a fuck if UCF fans think that they should be in the playoff or not. It's about they beat one Power 5 conference team all year. And so I do think all the teams that have to play Power 5 conference schedules within those rugged conferences where I think they deal with maybe more attrition, more pressure, I think it's just a lot different. And I'm not saying that UCF shouldn't get a shot in some scenario, but in the scenario that we have right now at 4 teams, Group of 5 teams should not get a shot. And so that's just my opinion on that. I think they need to play teams to prove it. And if you do have 8 and you get a Group of 5 team that qualifies at a certain ranking, then hell yeah, give them a shot, put them at the 8 seed, let them play whoever the 1 is and see if they can prove it. And I think that's fair. I think if you have all the Power 5 champions. Now, one thing I'll say too, though, with that is that it can't be probably like an automatic qualifier. Like, for example, if Pitt beat Clemson, they don't deserve to go to the playoff. But
I would still put them in.
Really?
Yeah, because if we're going to expand the playoff, then we're getting further away from really what the quote-unquote best teams are. So you might as well – the reason I would like it is because I think expanding the playoff, every time you expand it, it reduces the value of the regular season. But if you make it so that the conference champion is guaranteed to get in, it keeps every single divisional race, in the Power 5 relevant throughout the entire season.
Well, tell me.
That's why 16-team power conferences is the best idea.
Well, tell me what you guys think about this thing, because I think I have a fix, Addison, for that scenario, because I think that's crazy that Pitt would be able to get in then, or like Northwestern.
They'd have to beat Clemson though.
I think they should get rid of the divisions and the conference championship games. And I know, like Tolman said, that this could be like a money situation where you can't lose those games, like just due to money and politics. But I think if they get rid of the divisions and do it like the Big 12 does it essentially, then I think you would take care of that. Like you won't end up with like Pitt or Northwestern getting a playoff berth. You'll just have all the Power 5 conferences, play each other. You'll have your two best come out if you still want to have like a championship game that's not based on divisions. But I think if they get rid of the divisions, I'm okay with still having the conference championship games. I think that makes some sense. But you got to scrap the divisions then, in my opinion. And do you think that works at all, or like what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's generally a good idea.
Okay, Tolman, what do you think about that?
I wouldn't like the scenarios where Ohio State and Michigan end up playing back to back, but in theory, it's a good idea. Yeah, the divisions are kind of stupid.
Yeah,
I like scrapping the divisions, and I like the opportunity to beat Michigan twice in the season.
Yeah.
I will like beating Michigan twice in the season because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, right.
So I'm cool with that.
Yeah. So I think we all have the same thoughts. Like mainly, if they stick with 4 for the time being, I really think the committee needs to define much more clearly like what their criteria is, because like we've said, Addison, there's just a lot of subjectivity to where if Georgia would have gotten in over Oklahoma and Ohio State, I mean there would have been a lot of outrage. I mean you have a Big 12 and Big 10 one-loss champion being left out over a team in another conference that couldn't even win their conference, no matter if it's against Alabama or not, and have 2 losses. I mean, I just think that's where you get some biases that could come in. And the thing is, I think Georgia's a top 4 team, but what I think shouldn't matter because there shouldn't be that much maybe subjectivity in it, because that's where, again, I go back to Corey from Denver's point about it's really hard to use like the eye test argument when there's such like an imbalance in schedule. A lot of these teams, they don't play each other all year long. Like the Big Ten doesn't play all the SEC teams. It's hard to quantify all this. So I don't know. I think that if they could come up with like a much more like a clearer definition of like what their criteria is, they could help like alleviate some of these problems. And like you guys said, some of the years expansion would have made 0 sense. Like this year, for example, it looks like it would be a good year for 6 or 8 teams, but I think moving forward, it just would have helped alleviate a lot of the problems if we just did go with like 5 power conference champions, couple at-larges, and then like give the little guy a shot or whatever if they deserve it. If they don't meet a certain qualification as far as ranking, or maybe you have it written into the contract like they have to play maybe at least like 2 Power 5 out of conference teams or something like that. Like you got to make it to where they're just not getting thrown a bone just because they're the little guy. Like that's stupid. I think that's really soft and pathetic. So, Tolman, do you have any additional thoughts on like the selection, the playoff talk, or are you good with that?
I'm good. Like I said, my wild theory about the 16 team super conferences, I think is your best chance to get best and most deserving.
Well, you know what? Your scenario, that almost happened when the Big 12 almost dissolved and the Big 10 and Pac-12 almost basically split those teams. That almost happened. You might have gotten 4 major conferences, and that could have happened.
Right. And so one argument against that, would come into play this year. You would say that, well, this idea is stupid because you end up with Washington and Utah playing for a playoff spot. But that's if you're thinking about conferences as they traditionally are.
Right.
If you adopted this model, the Pac-12 would be some hybrid with the Big 12, and you could have had Washington playing Oklahoma for that spot in the playoffs. So
right.
I think I would absolutely love to see it. And when I'm czar of college football, I'm gonna find a way to make the money, make it happen.
Right.
It's all universities.
Right. Addison, any final thoughts on that before we wrap it up?
the 14 playoff, my biggest problem is I don't like the committee.
Yeah.
More so than the size of the playoff. I just don't like the committee.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And if it did expand, like, this is pretty much a requirement for me to get on board with it. Have campus sites until the championship.
I totally agree. You got to have them.
Every time I see like someone like throwing out a proposal or something, they always have like every one of the playoff games is at a fucking bowl site, which is retarded.
Well, I think for many reasons.
We're gonna have the fans and the players travel 3 weeks in a row and
right.
just give the bowl execs money for no reason.
Right. Yeah, that's.
Have it at campus sites.
Yeah.
Instead of having Ohio State play a home game against my new alma mater, Tulane, or Alabama playing their traditional home game against College of Charleston, why don't you just eliminate that 12th game that means absolutely nothing, and then if you're going to have an extra game for a playoff, you make that campus site.
Yeah, I think at least make the first round campus sites. Like, have all of them play at least that first round, and then if you want to use like the New Year's 6 locations for the rest of it, I could see that being like a compromise.
How fascinating would Ohio State and Notre Dame be this year?
Right, or like
6 versus 3. Like, who wants to see? Everyone wants to see that.
Right, or you finally get like your SEC team playing North in the winter or something. Like you get some really intriguing matchups. As Addison alluded to, that's a really good point, is that it costs a lot of money to travel and to go to these freaking bowl games where you're paying these execs and all these like sponsors. I think that campus sites that's what people want. And if you're going to expand, you have the campus sites until hopefully at least just the championship game. If we have to come to some compromise where just the first round is campus sites, and then you have essentially like how you have it set up now where you have the semifinals at like major bowl sites, I'm okay with that. But I agree with Addison. Like, if they expand, I want campus sites because it would make the most sense financially for the fans. It would make more sense for the players not having to travel as much. And I just think that's what people want. So,
and you get the true college atmosphere,
right?
And another great thing about it is it really incentivizes finishing high in the rankings, so you get home field.
It would definitely not. It would make it so, like we've talked about the playoff expanding and possibly devaluing like the regular season. That would change that. It would emphasize finishing, like you said, as high as you possibly could, because OSU, they get blown out by Purdue. Well, instead, if they win that game, then they're playing in Columbus against, Notre Dame or like Oklahoma. But, they lose that game, they sneak in, all of a sudden they're in Tuscaloosa. So,
yeah,
huge
I
difference.
I would never want to see 16 teams.
No, that's too many. That's too many. I think 8 is enough to fit in what is most likely all of the national title contenders. You're able to rep all the regions of the country. If you start getting into 16 or more, then are we really trying to give like Iowa and like Fresno State a shot at the national title? I mean, it's starting to get a little ridiculous. So,
All right. So final question.
Yeah.
Over under 3.5 years until the NCAA or college football or whatever adopts an 18 playoff.
I would say over, because I think their contract is till like 2024 or something like that, and I'm not sure they're willing to break it.
Well, then, stupid question then.
Well, no, it's not stupid because they could break it.
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Yeah.
You have a contract, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they found a way around it.
Well, and it's about money. Follow the money. If they think they can make more money, then they will.
The 14 playoff happened like really quick when they actually started to get serious about it.
Right.
So yeah, the same thing could happen if they really wanted to go to 8.
Yeah.
I'm just worried that they'll expand, but like fuck it up.
They could. They've done it before.
They'll just like keep the committee or something.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I think we can all agree that I think we just want to see clear definition of like what the criteria is, and then maybe go from there. But at least it's better than like the old system prior to the BCS where you just never knew who the best team was. But You might have had an idea, then you got the BCS, but as as TV has progressed to where everybody's on TV now, and kids are kind of spreading more out and not going to just like 8 programs, then there is going to be a little bit more parity. And so the playoff made sense to me when it happened. We're getting closer to like a true legitimate champion, and hopefully, like we said, hopefully they do not mess it up if they do expand. But
yeah, we definitely need more intersectional matchups in college football. Like there are not enough out of conference games where like the top teams in the different conferences are playing each other.
yeah, I would agree, and that could help solve a lot of this too. When you kind of they played each other, wins will matter on the field. But we'll see moving forward.
Contracts and money screws all that up.
It does, yeah. You gotta follow the money.
We can probably over this break when I'm back home, we can probably have an entire podcast about ethics behind how the NCAA runs college sports.
Yeah, so Tolman, that's a good segue. As we wrap up the pod here, I'm not exactly sure when we'll be back on. I know we'll be back on at least one more time in the next month. I would suspect maybe 2 to 3 times, but we'll have a couple different pods. We will have one in particular where we will preview the New Year's Six games and the college football playoff semifinals. And then after that, of course, I think we'll have a pod previewing, the national championship game. But in between now and then, we might come up with a couple different ideas and throw some pods up there. So before I wrap it up, Addison, any final thoughts?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Tolman?
I'm good.
All right, so until next time.